Good morning, everybody. Dear Vice Chancellor, dear Peter, my friend, it's a great honor to be with you today in this Water for Food Global Conference. Thank you for your invitation. It's also for me a pleasure to be for the first time in this rainy Nebraska. I had prepared two options in my speech, rainy and sunny, but 2 days before it has rained and today is sunny, so wonderful Nebraska. I think it will be better. And thank you for being indulgent with my efforts to speak fluently your beautiful language. But as a French person, I have a Latin culture, and I try to speak your language. I would like to mention, of course, here not only Peter and Christopher Neal, Dale Jacobson, Deborah Lace, Rabbi Motor, Mark Smith, all members of the World Water Council, and many others, FAO, ICID here, who bring since 25 years to the World Water Council knowledge, experience, know-how on these essential subjects of water, soil, food production, and I would like to insist the necessary imperative balance between humans and nature. So I could say today, dear friends of Water for Food, today we live in a world where so many old balances are being challenged. There are so many tensions, and sometimes they lead to very serious crises. Look, we are talking about diplomatic crisis, moving sometimes in military crisis, energy crisis, and health crisis. COVID period is not so far. And obviously, these are heavy consequences on the availability of water, on heavy pollution of rivers and soils all over the world, but also on food production, and all this accentuated by the growth of megacities and urban concentration. My strong personal conviction is that, in fact, human beings are causing tensions and are under pressure, strong pressure. And so we can say there is indeed a crisis of the humankind during these years, the beginning of this century. Our world has lived on credit for nearly a century, spending more than earning. Living standards have risen, but at the same time, inequalities have increased. And in the management of natural resources, we have failed. Plunder and waste have been the rule, whereas the demand of resources is greater than the supply. And the poor world would naturally like to be less poor. And the rich world is convinced that it must always be richer. Obviously, the global machine is going wrong. In a context of climate divagation but mainly demographic anarchy. The planet has become a slave to humans and is now revolting. It's reacting to our errors, to our excesses. The air, soil, fresh water and oceans are strongly polluted in some part of the world and mostly in the cities. We are having difficulty breathing, drinking and eating at the very moment. It's a paradox when human intelligence is allowing itself a digital evolution perhaps a digital revolution unparalleled in the history of human societies. The picture I'm describing, dear friends, is not negative. It's simply realistic. It's intended to lay the foundations for the recovery of humanity. And the issues that bring us together here in Lincoln and Nebraska are essential to future life. Water, energy, food, health, and education are fingers of a single hand. What we call the five fingers alliance. And I would like to deliver today here a message of hope, a message of confidence, of will, a message of action, as the president of university has said yesterday, and he is right. We need to move to actions and to concrete actions. That brings us together and leaves disputes, conflicts in the waiting room of the planet, our planet. So let me try to offer you with humility, some modest reflections and walk with you on the road to solutions, on the path to answers that can guarantee shared prosperity and sobriety. If you will, let's go back to the source of the water resource. Demographics and climate require our reaction before action. Because of increased droughts, it has been very well described yesterday, and floods, as well as population increases, especially in the megacities I will mention. Be attentive and pay attention to the fact that at this moment we have 30 megacities that have more than 20 million inhabitants and perhaps more than 30 million inhabitants, and they are very difficult to manage. And so we need additional water resource and to guarantee their quality. That's what I call producing more water. And to do this, we will use our imagination and innovative skills. A few examples. Pumping into more groundwater so as to make the invisible resource visible. There is a few examples, good and better. So we have to do that with more precautions. The example of Libya in the past is a very good one. Transferring more water over greater distances, like in China, 3,000 kilometers of new canals and networks, but with more precautions. Desalinating seawater to brackish water, as more than 70 countries in the world today are already doing. Desalination is now more accessible due to the use of reverse osmosis. It has reduced the cost to less than $1 a cubic meter, and sometimes in the bigger plants in Israel, in Ashkelon, Israel, or in Saudi Arabia, less than 50 cents a cubic meter. And so, for example, African countries as Senegal, Djibouti, Namibia, and others make now extensive use of this process to overcome a water shortage, but with more precautions. When you desalinate, you are separating water from soil, and at the end, you keep the salt in your arms, in your hand, and it could be a strong problem. Recycling wastewater also, which will undoubtedly play an increasing major role in the future once secondary and tertiary treatment is correctly implemented, because recycling after treatment is easy and inexpensive. And today recycling water is mostly used for parks, urban parks, golf course, green spaces, forest, but it's gradually being extended to domestic use, agriculture and industry. It will be one of the main evolution in water resource in the future with groundwater use, but always with more precautions. And then there is the question of water for energy, and the SATAM has the equations of energy for water. That's a strong link. Water for energy is, first of all in the history, the production of hydroelectricity through the use of water reservoirs in dams. This is now a sensitive issue all over the world. Why? Because many dams in the past have required the displacement of population, caused damage to historical heritage, and also damaged biodiversity and degraded ecosystems. So we need to have a new concept. And the future lies in aquatic reserves, which will have two complementary characteristics. First, to be a reservoir of biodiversity for fauna and flora, a reservoir subject to rigorous and intangible protection rules. And secondly, to conserve and store water resource for hydroelectricity, sometimes cooling of nuclear power plants, and especially for the main domestic, agricultural, and industrial uses. So, protect, conserve, and use should be the shared concept of these new types of water reserves. These reserves are lacking throughout the world, and their absence is often the cause of droughts, floods insecurity, food insecurity, and in some extreme cases, hunger, like during this month in Somalia, in Ethiopia, in South Sudan. And tomorrow, more than yesterday, we will have to know how to conserve the water of the rainy season to the dry season of 1 year for the next year. And of course, these reservoirs are silting up, atrophying sometimes polluted. This means that their maintenance and upkeep must be a public policy priority. And recent examples in California, in Algeria, in Brazil, and other countries show the importance of good management of water resources. Regarding the impact on water resources, just a few words concerning hydrogen production. This is a subject that has been frequently raised recently, very recently. Although hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe, but it exists only in very small quantities on Earth, in its pure or natural state. It must therefore be produced from other molecules, in particular water. And developing the use of so-called green hydrogen as a fuel in all kinds of vehicles, cars, but above all trains, heavy vehicles, ships, etc., requires large quantities of water, varying today from 10 liters to 120 liters for 1 kilo of hydrogen. And these different ratios could be explained by the type of the energy source used: wind, solar, nuclear, and others. And political choices will have to be made to develop this source of energy, which on the one hand may be detrimental to water resources, and on the other, however, may be an important solution for supplying carbon-free energy to industrial units producing nitrogen, fertilizers, as in Morocco, for example, for phosphate. Green hydrogen is an innovative solution but a very sensitive subject, and the progress of various techniques and technologies and implementation contexts will have to be followed with great attention, and again with great precaution. Having more water resources is not enough. You all know that, well, here, all of you, producing more and producing better also means consuming less and consuming better. Consuming less means, first of all, making efficient use of all the innovations that are available to us today, and even more so tomorrow. I would like to insist on the benefits we can draw from the digital evolution or revolution. Digital technologies can be integrated at every stage of the water cycle to improve the water value chain. Digital technologies range from sensors to detect pressure losses on the whole network, monitoring to control, optimize, and anticipate operations, forecasting to predict weather and weather events, data processing, and virtual and augmented reality to design new plans and networks. All kinds of mobile tools using mobile phones, private computers, are playing step by step a major role. Let us make the best of our wireless networks, data analysis, Internet of Things, blockchain solutions, cybersecurity, sometimes perhaps cryptocurrencies for water, but also for sanitation, waste, air, soil, and energy. But let's never forget to always put the human being in the loop. Man is not meant to serve technology. It's technological progress today being digital which have to serve humankind and cannot allow users to create what I call uncontrolled and autonomous authorities. That's the advocacy of the World Water Council, taking care that the machine of progress remains under control. But consuming less also means consuming better. What does it mean? It means trusting the intelligence of the consumer, the intelligence of the user, and beyond that, the citizen. Whether it's the citizen, the industrial, the shopkeeper, or even more the farmer, everyone will be encouraged, but also sometimes obliged to spare water, sparing water for shared prosperity. Recent studies carried out in England, for example, last year, with volunteers' families have shown that in the first year, they easily achieved a 15% reduction in their energy and water consumption as soon as they have decided to pay attention. In the same way, we must make progress to avoid food waste and losses, which unfortunately reach up sometimes to 30% also in the poorest countries in the whole food production chain. And you know much better than I do as experts that agriculture everywhere in the world has to be a major source of water savings. The world needs to be aware of the threats and needs to strike the right balance between water and food to feed 8, 9, perhaps 10 billion people at the end of this century. What can we say at our African friends, some of them are in this room, who today number just over a billion, 1.2 billion inhabitants, and who are supposed to number 4 billion at the end of this century? What can we say? Where is the water resource? Where is the soil? What crops, what inputs, which food habits to reinforce or create? That's a huge challenge, and not only in Africa. Water and food are two of the most important priorities of tomorrow's world. That's why we say to political leaders, to opinion leaders, to media, stop ignoring water. And I would like to say today here in Lincoln, stop ignoring that the planet needs food and water for food. That's why, dear colleagues, we say every day to the head of states, to the head of government, to parliamentarians, to elected local authorities, water is politics. We have the technological solutions, we have the financial solutions, we have the governance solutions, but we need political will. And a few leaders all over the world are ignoring the issue of water and the issue of water for food. These commitments, as I say, two fronts: technology, finance, and governance. And these are the pillars of political actions for water, and especially for water for food. I've just mentioned techniques and technology, but finance also requires innovation and imagination to implement new types of policies such as blended finance, sub-sovereignty, true prices, partnership, etc. Governance also must evolve towards better international cooperation, particularly for the emergence of national and transboundary river basin policies. But efficient, equitable, and sustainable water governance also means including the competence and the responsibility of local communities, especially in irrigation and food production. This is the meaning of the initiative taken 2 years ago by the Nature Conservancy, the International Network of Basin Organization, and our World Water Council. This initiative is based on a declaration signed by more than 100 organizations in the world today from all countries, which proclaims that there is no water security without ecological security, and no ecological security without water security. It has been adopted by the United Nations just a few months ago as an official action plan capable of boosting the objective of the SDG 6, and among the objectives of this action plan, we want to promote nature-based solutions, which have been mentioned yesterday, and better integrate water and nature policies. These, dear colleagues, dear friends, are some thoughts on the future of water. We want all together to be the voice of water which brings together capacities and commitments for water. The Council brings together 300 water-related organizations from 70 countries, 60 committed governments, and we want to facilitate action, solutions, and concrete responses. This is what the World Water Forums are all about. I think later you will have a message from the Indonesian minister in charge of the preparation of the next forum, which will take place exactly in 1 year, in May 2024 in Bali, Indonesia. And together we want a more political forum marked by strong and lasting commitments. At the same time, we want it to be a forum for the emergence of responses that will improve access to water on the ground. We need to show that we are able to talk on altitude, but we need to show that we are able to bring concrete response to the population which is waiting for these solutions to change their daily life. And so Bali Forum will be organized around three processes: a thematic processes, a regional process. You will have a regional process for the Americas, and a political process at different levels, as head of states, ministers, parliamentarians, local authorities, and basin authorities. So Water for Food will be present in each of these processes. And to underline the importance that the World Water Council gives to Water for Food, I have asked Peter McCormick to be one of the three persons in the world in charge of the preparation of this 10th World Water Forum. And as I said, we need everyone. Do not hesitate to be part of in this year of preparation. Choose your working, move to the websites of the World Water Council and the World Water Forum, where you will find all the information you need to get involved in the preparation and push the cause of water. Thank you for had the patience to listen to me. Thank you to the organizer. Thank you all for raising high and strong the global challenge of water and food. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Loïc Fauchon. That was really giving you the overview of the challenges, but also the optimism about some of the opportunities, and then the lead up to the World Water Forum this time next year. We do have a video from the minister. It's a little longer than we expected, so what I'd like to do is propose we show that over lunch. The minister will go into more detail on the event in Bali, and so we can appreciate that in time and not rush the next speaker on our schedule, because and then we will come back to that. So look forward to that at lunchtime, and certainly myself, but also President Fauchon's here, Christopher and others involved in the World Water Forum. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. With that, I would like to introduce our next speaker. Again, really coming at this from a global perspective, the International Water Management Institute. That's my former employer, coming up to 7 years ago. So it's part of the International Agricultural Centers, and it gives me great pleasure to invite Mark Smith.
Wonderful, thank you, Peter. Thank you to the University of Nebraska and DWFI and Peter for the opportunity to speak with you today, to attend this conference. World Water Forums are great, Loïc, but small conferences are wonderful. Because you get to meet with people and talk to people and really get stuck into conversations. And in part what I thought to try and use the time I have this morning to do was to try and kick off a conversation that I think needs to happen, and that I hope we can have together. Peter's suggestion to me when I asked him what I might focus on was that I talk about developments at IWMI, the International Water Management Institute, and CGIR, this network of international research institutes, in terms of program and strategy and where we're headed. And I'm going to do that. I'll get to that. But mostly I decided to use this opportunity, as I said, to raise some questions about whether collectively we're set up to tackle the drivers of water insecurity in the future, and the so-called global water crisis, and the demands that are coming at us because of that. I'm going to start off global, but I will get practical. But I warn you, I don't come with all the answers. As I said, I'm quite interested in seeing what kind of discussion we can provoke about what we can do and what's needed. I look there. So the future of water security, we know this. It's not easy. It's difficult as we look into the future. And on the slide on the left-hand side, you see the set of quite extraordinary exponential curves that, if you're familiar with the papers that have focused on from the last 10 years or so on the idea of the great acceleration, these exponential curves on different indicators of the Earth system and how it's changing and the impacts that that's having on our social well-being and on our economies and on our ecosystems. This great acceleration is driving profound changes in the Earth system, in climate, in water, in nature, and with impacts on food. And climate change, of course, is also changing water regimes and water risks, which is not news to those in this audience. And it was thoroughly reviewed. These changes that climate change is driving was thoroughly reviewed and assessed in last year's IPCC report. The water chapter and the graphics on the right-hand side are taken from that report. The water chapter of the IPCC made very clear the case that adaptation to climate change depends on water management and will demand the scaling up and faster application of water management practices, and especially so in agriculture, and especially so because of the vulnerabilities we face in our food system because of climate change. The report was full of things that should alarm us, but hidden in that report was also an extra alarming little factoid I found, which is that beyond 2 degrees of warming, beyond 2 degrees Celsius of warming, the effectiveness of water-related adaptation, of the adaptation that we can achieve with water, falls. So it's saying we can adapt, we have the means, we have the means to adapt as the climate warms, but beyond 2 degrees C, we get into more and more trouble. So all of this is putting pressure on water security. Water security, that combination of availability of water in terms of quantity and quality, and then managing the risks to that. So water security is becoming harder to achieve, and action is becoming more urgent. The future needs for water for food and how we meet them is becoming more uncertain. There are huge divergences in expectations for future water needs for irrigation, for example, globally. So on the left-hand side is an excerpt from that IPCC report that says that irrigation water requirements, and this is reviewed by experts and governments around the world, right? Says that irrigation water requirements are projected to grow by 2 to 3-fold by the end of the century. Versus the research on the right-hand side, which comes from the Potsdam Climate Institute, which says that meeting future demand for food within planetary boundaries will require widespread reallocation of cropland between regions and the net global decrease in irrigation water use. So which future should we be preparing for? So against this backdrop, and in this world of cascading crises that President Fauchon introduced as well in his remarks, against this backdrop and in this world of cascading crisis, water is rising up the global agenda. At COP27 in Egypt in November, the importance of water systems for climate action was agreed for the first time. And that was a step forward, a welcome step forward. But more impressive was there was a high-level round table in the course of the COP on water security. And for some reason or another, I managed to get an invitation into that. It was a closed-door round table with heads of state and heads of government, about 15 or 18 prime ministers and presidents sitting in the room, sitting around a table, talking about the importance of water and the urgency of taking action on the water crisis. And that was the language they were very readily using. And they called for increased global cooperation. They called for ramping up of investment. They recognized that climate action needed to tackle water risk, needed to be central to climate action. And they called for water to have a higher political priority. They said water should be on the agenda at every global forum. Climate, biodiversity, food, finance, peace and security. They said very clearly behind those closed doors that water should be on every agenda. And of course the UN Water Conference that took place just 2 months ago in March, it was organized with the purpose of mobilizing stronger global commitment and action on water. And in the preparatory meeting for the UN conference last October, the President of the UN General Assembly said this, as the quotation you see on the top left of the slide: "The water crisis is a systemic challenge. We need proactive, science-based solutions for the water crisis. But knowing is not enough. We must apply." And the conference, as you know, it adopted the Water Action Agenda based on commitments made by governments, by the multilateral system, by NGOs. And at the close of the conference, the quotation on the bottom right of the slide, at the close of the conference, the UN Secretary General said, "All of humanity's hopes for the future depend in some way on charting a new science-based course to bring the Water Action Agenda to life. All of humanity's hopes depend on getting water right," was his message. So the call for action and urgency to us cannot be clearer. But are we in a position to be able to respond at the scale and with the speed and with the urgency needed? Our reality, my view, our reality is that we have a fragmented institutional architecture for water with a lack of clear common priorities or the convening power, including across sectors, to create those clear common priorities. We're very good at talking across sectors. I don't think that's a problem. If you look at in the global arena and the regional arena, most of the actors in the water dialogue are from non-water institutions. So we are good at talking across sectors. We can do that. Our problem is leading across sectors. So the problem is not, as we've heard for so long, in my view, the problem is not getting out of the water box. I think we do that quite well, actually. It is weak water institutions. We don't have that strength in our institutions to lead what those world leaders in that closed room were saying should be done. And alongside this, there's a clear lack of urgency on water research and innovation. That's my institution's business and the business of this institution that we're meeting at today. A lack of urgency on water research and innovation, despite the very rapid changes that are underway in terms of water risks, in terms of accelerating uncertainty. So while UN leaders call for science-based action, if we're very honest, the reality is that water knowledge, research, and innovation is valued in global policy spaces, in global policy dialogue. But it's not central. It's not a central pillar of what those leaders think needs to be done. And yet, because of climate change, we know that the past is no longer a guide to future water risks and water security. So therefore, isn't it crucial that we have a new guide? If the past no longer works as that guide, we're going to need a new guide to help to take us forward. So shouldn't new knowledge, research, and innovation be an urgent priority, including at that policy level? And then even if it was that urgent priority, I think we lack a coherent collective strategy for water systems, knowledge, research, and innovation that will galvanize and align water system science and galvanize investment in it. We don't have that clarity. We lack a response to this challenge that was put to us in an editorial in Nature Sustainability 2 years ago. So in a world of suffering from increasing threats of both too much water and not enough at the same time, water studies, water system science, water studies need to confront the reality that it may be pursuing too many publications and not enough ideas. And this is an untenable model for the field and a potential danger to society. So we have some big challenges in front of us. We have to build on the momentum of the UN Water Conference, and now is exactly the time to do that. There are huge risks across global systems, nature, climate, food, water. Water security is getting harder. The delays will put it further out of reach for those, especially those that are most vulnerable. The institutional architecture we have and the strategy for water knowledge, research, and innovation is fragmented and not driving the action and investment at the scale and speed needed. I told you I wanted to start a conversation, okay? So therefore, what should be the priorities for action on water security? What should be the priorities for research for development? So to answer these questions, we tried something a little bit novel. We asked people this question: what are high ambition, collective actions that will create strong alignment of knowledge and research, policy, business, and on-the-ground implementation to deliver future water security? We created a multi-stakeholder dialogue to address the question. This was an initiative we've run over the last roughly 12 months called the Transformative Futures for Water Security Initiative, a multi-stakeholder dialogue to address that question. We set out to bridge the science policy to action gap by using dialogue to align collective action by stakeholders on critical priorities for transforming future water systems. Our process was bottom-up. It was very much rooted in South-South dialogue. And the purpose was, the ambition was, the aim was to generate a set of what we called high-ambition missions for inclusive science-based action on water security. And I'm going to show you these missions that came out of this process in just a minute. But first, what do we mean by missions? Our missions are big, difficult goals for transforming water security to create impact at scale by combining applied research, policy change, private sector action, investment, alongside inclusive development that's based on advancing the equality of women and men and between generations. We held online dialogues in 8 regions from Southeast Asia across to Latin America, Southeast Asia, South Asia, Central Asia, MENA, Eastern Africa, Southern Africa, Western Central Africa, and Latin America. Online dialogues across those 8 regions. The process then culminated, it finished in an in-person conference in Cape Town in February, in which we used all of the inputs that we gathered from that process to design these 8 missions. Our dialogues were co-convened by a network of more than 60 co-convening organizations. We had contributions from more than 400 organizations and about 1,000 people. We used a model, what we called youth co-guardianship. We're talking about the future. So young people, the next generation of leaders, has to be the drivers of that conversation. So our model of youth co-guardianship was a process of ensuring that youth networks, the World Youth Parliament for Water, regional youth, water youth networks, co-owned and co-led with us this process. We had participation from stakeholder groups, from policymakers, local government, private sector, civil society, funders, investors, sectors beyond water, and knowledge generators, as well as, of course, youth. At that final conference in Cape Town, we had just under 200 participants from a little over 50 countries and 144 organizations. So these are our missions. So we identified 8 missions. These are stakeholder-driven priorities. The 8 missions are systemic. They're reinforcing of each other. And I divide them into 2 sets of 4. So the first set of 4, which in this crazy loopy diagram, which we're still working on, are in the green loops. The first set of 4, these are missions to address critical systemic outcomes. The first, build farmers' resilience to climate change and water risks by using climate-smart interventions to raise water productivity and transform agriculture. Very familiar to this conference. The second, deliver sustainable, stakeholder-driven WASH services with accountable institutions, adequate information, and policies to achieve universal access. The third, increase freshwater availability through circular management of wastewater, new technologies for non-conventional water, and cutting non-revenue losses. President Fauchon touched very much on this theme in his remarks. Make water infrastructure future-ready using ecological and built infrastructure that is complementary, equitable, and resilient. Buried in there is nature-based solutions and so on. The second set of 4 missions are enabling missions. So the first of those is overcome data and information barriers. Again, President Fauchon spoke about that. Overcome data and information barriers by developing and operationalizing digital solutions. Second is make water decisions fit for the future by integrating the full range of values of water and the objectives of multiple sectors and stakeholders and their trade-offs. This is where the nexus fits. This is where the idea of multiple values of water and how we navigate those fits. The third mission is deliver good water governance and transboundary cooperation that is inclusive and participatory and equitable and so on. And the fourth of these enabling missions is adapt to future water regimes and risks with enhanced climate information, preparedness, management, innovation, and capacity development. So those are the 8 missions that this stakeholder process generated in terms of the priorities for transforming water systems as they saw them. Importantly, alongside these missions are a set of what we call systemic levers. These are key levers that participants identified as common to strategies for all the missions. So here is gender equality, social inclusion, youth leadership, financing, capacity development, and so on. If you want to read more about that, about our process and those missions, this was written up in a comment piece published in the journal Nature Water just ahead of the New York conference. So I invite you to look that up. As I said when I introduced the idea of missions, part of our purpose was to try and catalyze ambition. We wanted to try and drive forward-looking ambition as part of all of the dialogue that was taking place around the New York conference. So on the screen are some of the dimensions of these missions, and there are other indicators we can use. But you see here, when you look at these dimensions, these are big, difficult goals. If we deliver these, if we come together to deliver these, we'll transform pathways for future water security. And the other thing to note is, when we take these missions down to a country or to a basin, they also very quickly become very concrete, and we have conversations ongoing in Pakistan, in Nepal, in South Africa, and other places, which demonstrate the ambition that working in this mission-driven way can bring. Imagine those 8 missions taken into the water agenda in Pakistan. It's big, hard things to do, and that's what we need to be setting ourselves up to do, in my view. Okay, so what does that mean for a mission-driven agenda for water for food? Well, the obvious one is that the first mission that I introduced, Build Farmers' Resilience to Climate Change and Water Risks, is at the core of that. It's at the core of what's being spoken about at this conference this week. But the others are needed too. That's the important thing to note here. The other missions are needed too in order to secure this mission. So the missions and the levers are interconnected, and by using them, we also drive the systems approach that is needed for transforming the future that is in front of us. The missions and a mission-driven approach, and this multi-stakeholder approach, it presents us with an opportunity to align stakeholder action to catalyze collective action. So these are missions for collective action on inclusive science-based action on water security, to align applied research, inclusive development action, as you see across the bottom of the slide there, inclusive development policy and action, private sector action and investment in combination with those systemic levers which you see in the middle row. We do that by building on what we already do. This is not about reinventing the agenda, reinventing everything that we're already doing, by building on what we're doing and then challenging ourselves to identify what do we need to do now to deliver those missions. So trying to galvanize the action that the UN Secretary General and the UN President of the General Assembly have called for in those quotes that I showed you earlier. So that is a worthy ideal, but still our institutional setup is fragmented. So this calls also, I think, for a new approach to collective action. Our idea is to build coalitions to promote and catalyze action on the missions. But perhaps we also need to be bolder. That future is really difficult. So now is the time we have to think boldly. So given the urgency of action and the fragmentation and institutional weakness that holds us back, is it time to think about a new platform? Is it time to think about a new platform and new incentives that galvanize shared commitment to common guiding missions, convening of new partnerships, mobilizing of new investment in this collective action, and make the collaboration that was spoken about by the panel yesterday here, those that were here, make that collaboration, that challenge of collaboration that was spoken about as so necessary but difficult, make that collaboration easier so that we can come with science-based action that's needed to meet the moment in terms of urgency, scale, and speed. So what's then the role of research for development? Again, the business of my institution. What are the implications for IWMI and the one CGIAR, the integration of the family of CGIAR institutes? First thing is to be very clear that the missions I'm speaking of, they are not IWMI's missions. They are the missions of those stakeholders that built them. So our job is to contribute to them, is to do what we can do to contribute to them. So we have to ask ourselves in IWMI and CGIAR, given those are the missions that this stakeholder process has set. What can we be doing to contribute to that? How can we contribute through our existing research for development and the One CGIAR portfolio of initiatives through the kinds of work we do already, farmer-led irrigation modernization, raising water productivity, improving the way we manage across the water, energy, food nexus, early warning and management of water risks and floods and droughts, building resilience, recycling of wastewater, supporting and strengthening water governance, overcoming barriers to inclusion. All of those things remain key. But also we have to now look ahead, and given that the global context of water insecurity, of the severity of the risks across the climate, nature, food and water systems, we have to challenge ourselves. We have to challenge ourselves in IMI and in the One CGIAR to do much more, I think. To use knowledge, research and innovation and our research for development tools as part of larger scale systems change. To contribute to the high ambition missions that the stakeholders have set, but also to take up the kind of challenge that Beth Ford spoke about yesterday. She said, we're coming to the end of the gain that GMOs can make. It is lack of investment in infrastructure and into research to tackle the water challenge and the water extremes that is needed. We have to step forward with our collective action to take that on. So we're working this year to set a new strategy, 2024 to 2030 for IMI and for One CGIAR water systems. We need to ensure that we're delivering into those stakeholder missions, meeting that demand. We need to bridge the data revolution, digital innovation, artificial intelligence, and how that's changing the world, to driving climate resilience in basins and across the nexus to improve lives and livelihoods in households and communities. We have to be transformational. This is the mission of One CGIAR. We have to be transformational. The mission of One CGIAR is research and innovation to advance the transformation of food, land, and water systems in a climate crisis. We have to take that seriously and be transformational and challenge ourselves to do that. And that will mean leveraging all of the synergies of water-related research for development across the CGIAR system. That will mean having a higher ambition and more boldness in our partnerships. So as collective action calls for, as delivering that science-based action that the UN Secretary General called for. So continuing to convene and catalyze coalitions, stepping up and stepping forward to convene and catalyze coalitions. So work with research for development, the tools that we bring to the table in closer, more strategic partnerships with governments, with the private sector, with finance, with NGOs and others across the knowledge sector to deliver change, to deliver this bigger vision of change and the contributions that we can make to it. And so responding to the clear demands that we hear. I was in Nepal the week before last and meeting with the water minister there, and he spoke very clearly about the assistance that they needed with understanding future water risks. He got that. And I think we have a clear role in trying to support that kind of policies and strategies to address that kind of challenge across those partner countries such as Nepal. So we need to do what we can in doing this to help water institutions. We have a role also in helping water institutions to become less fragmented and to become stronger in the international system, so that research for development, so that knowledge, research, and innovation is part of the driver for that momentum that we need to be building after the New York conference, after the UN 2023 water conference as we go forward. And I'll leave it there, but I invite us having a conversation about these themes that I've raised today. So thank you.